So hello and welcome everyone to the Harvard Center for International Development Friday Speaker Series. I'm Carla Estrella. I am a second-year MPAID student at HKS and a CID student ambassador. Here at CID, our mission is to build a thriving world for all. We work across the university and a global network of researchers and practitioners to build an international pool of talent, combine academic and practitioner networks, and deploy breakthrough research to address the world's most pressing challenges. This is why we're so excited about today's conversation on urban regional governance for sustainable development. Before we get started, I want to mention a few housekeeping rules. First, please enjoy lunch, but help us help the planet by doing your part. All food items, including cups, napkins, and utensils, are compostable. Second, please hold your questions until the speaker has finished the presentation and we have opened the Q&A section. At the time, I will go around with a microphone. We actually have 3 microphones, so we can hear you clearly. Also, we are recording today's session, but we will keep the camera on the speaker to ensure that only voices from the audience will be recorded. The video of this event will be available on the CID YouTube channel afterwards. A CID team member may take photos of the event for use on CID social media channels. If you're not comfortable with your photo being used this way, please let a CID team member know. Also, please use the QR codes located around the room to check into today's event. This helps the CID team track attendance and calculate food for future events. Finally, please make sure to subscribe to CID newsletter and follow Harvard CID on LinkedIn and Instagram to learn more about our events and stay connected to the CID community. Now, I would like to briefly introduce our speaker for today, Claudia López Hernández. She's the former mayor of Bogota, Colombia, and an Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellow at Harvard. Claudia's experience focuses in leading transformative civic and political initiatives. With 30 years dedicated to fostering democratic governance, sustainable development, and transparent public management, she has shaped political, economic, and social landscapes in Colombia. As Bogota's first female mayor, her tenure is marked by a strong commitment to social equity and justice, women's rights, environmental sustainability, and anti-corruption. Previously, as a senator, Claudia was acclaimed for her tenacity and capacity for collective action, especially in leading impactful anti-corruption campaigns. Before her political ascent, she excelled in academia as a researcher. Thank you all for being here, and Claudia, over to you.
Well, when you meter and a half, you don't want these things because you will be behind all the time. Thank you so much for coming, guys. Feel free to keep getting your food. Don't worry about it. And thank you so much for coming, for your interest in both getting involved with the CID, with the Center for International Development at the Kennedy School, which is a fantastic center. And hopefully you might be interested and passionate as I am and on this issue of urban regional governance for sustainable development. We're going to offer with CID a 4-class seminar, optional for any student at Harvard. Classes will be held on Thursdays at 12. We'll have 4 sessions, so hopefully after this short presentation, you might be more eager and interested in coming to the seminar. But anyways, let me sort of share with you what do I learn throughout the years. I've studied urban policy in academia. I hold a master's degree in Columbia University in urban policy and public administration. Through the years, I've worked with different cities, not only Bogota, but different cities in Latin America particularly. Recently went to India by first time, the country who's more rapidly urbanizing, along with other countries in Africa. So this topic really of urban governance and sustainable development is such a key present and future, and I would say much more present, but it will shape the future in the world. So let me start by saying a little bit, following and using my country and the city that I know the best, which is Bogota, the capital of Colombia. Why I think not only urban development, but urban development, sustainable development, and new industrialization, particularly for the Global South, are 3 topics that go together. And we should see them interconnected and understand the nuances of these issues. Second, let me tell you something. I was inaugurated in January 2020. I had the honor to be the first female ever to be popularly elected as mayor in Bogota, which speaks very well of Bogota. And the pandemic started like a week after. It was a huge challenge. Everybody told me, every time that I mention this story, everybody says, like, with this sort of face of empathy and sadness. Oh, yeah, poor you. You have to deal with the pandemic. And I always said after that, thank you. I always say after that, look, the pandemic was the easiest part of the job. And it really was the easiest part of the job. But one of the interesting things that happened throughout the pandemic is that suddenly the world literally discovered that mayors matters, that we are sort of relevant political figures and relevant public servants for many topics, ultimately who decide how to take care during the pandemic, how to vaccine people, where to vaccine them, how to call for different measures of public health, of social inclusion, how to deal whether or not with quarantines, how to open up the economy after and during the pandemic. All those issues ultimately rely on the mayor's desk. So I would say it was like a aha moment for many people, like, wow, these people that we don't pay too much attention to, we don't even vote for them, suddenly they are quite relevant for our daily lives. And so the world now is sort of thinking about the cities and the development in cities. And along, I will say, both the pandemic and previous to the pandemic and afterwards, climate change also made the world realize that cities matter, that urban development is not sort of a historic issue down in the past, it's actually something very present and very consequential for our lives. And third, I would say that the fact that people such as Michael Bloomberg, for example, became mayor of New York really has helped explaining the world why mayors matter, why we should help them. So for all those sort of reasons, urban development is, and cities and mayors and communities in cities are now quite relevant. Yet, my argument, and the argument I will sort of follow through the seminar that we are inviting you to register if you want to, is that as much as now you discover cities, for those of us who have been working for cities, working about cities and urban development, it was a fact well known 50 years ago. And now I would say that more than cities, regions and metropolitan regions is really the unit that we should be interested and studying and working on quite seriously. So what I'm meaning for, what I mean by that. So let's start by this sort of, if you mention metropolitan regions, you ultimately imply that it's going beyond the boundaries of cities or are large cities. Somehow they need to be addressed. So this is the map of 30 of the world's largest megacities. Bogota is one of them. It's in the 27th position in the ranking of the 30 megacities in the world. But this trend will increase. There will be more and more large cities. By 2030, which is, sort of next year almost, there will be more, particularly in Africa, particularly in Asia. Almost 40, maybe half of the new urbanization that's going to happen in the next 20 years will happen in one country, India, right? So this is a fact that is not going to be, that's going to be with us for a long time. Now let's come back to Colombia. So Colombia has this incredible geography. It's one of the more biodiverse places in the planet. We always compete with Costa Rica and Brazil, who's the top one. But the important factor is very, very quite diverse. It has a challenging geography as much as it is beautiful as an environmental fact or for tourism. It's quite a challenge for governance. It's quite a challenge for governance. So these are the three. We don't only have one, but three mountains. The Andes mountains, who start in Chile, end up in Colombia, not as one, but as three. And so the highest, we don't have seasons in Colombia. So our weather depends on how far or close you are to the level of the sea. Bogota, for example, is 2,600 meters above the level of the sea. So it's relatively a cool city. The closest you are to the beach, the nice weather such as this one you have. So here is Bogota, is this city, quite large. And in the map, you could see in red, another metropolitan areas. And there is a reason why I'm focusing on metropolitan regions rather than areas. I will explain later. And Bogota and the surrounded sort of state, Bogota, Colombia is divided in 32 states, 1,100 municipalities. Bogota is the largest municipality, is the district capital, has a special organization. And the surrounded state is Cundinamarca. And it is in blue because we decided to create a new figure, which is called the Metropolitan Region of Bogota and Cundinamarca. It's the first time we combine in an institutional setting municipalities, a district capital, and a state. Three different levels of governance to take care of different issues. Why? Because it depends on what you think. Metropolitan areas have been with us for around 50 years. Different cities in the United States, in Latin America, and other places of the world organized this institutional setting because challenges such as housing, mobility, traffic, provision of public services or utilities go beyond the boundaries of one city. A city, the bigger and the more developed it is, has functional relations for employment, for housing, for people within and without the boundaries of the city. So the way to organize that around those issues were the metropolitan areas. It's the same thing with Bogota. So it depends the topic that you think about. Bogota may have different implications with the surrounding municipalities and vicinities that they have. Let me say that Bogota, although it's a city, as a region, we could be, twice Costa Rica or twice Uruguay or the size of the Czech Republic. Meaning, even though it's a city, it could be as large in population or even in GDP as many countries. So that itself says something. As a city, we account, for example, for almost a fifth and a quarter of Colombia's GDP, a fifth of the population, a quarter of Colombia's GDP. But as a region, we account for almost 1/3 of Colombia's GDP. So if you see this, the typical thing that leads, the typical rationality that leads people to organize metropolitan areas, which is sort of the urban landmark of functional relationships that you have. So you see where people start a trip and finish a trip, where they live and where they go to work. So the yellow area is Bogota, but you could see that footprint is sort of going beyond the city. It's around another almost 23 municipalities, right? So if you think about the urban footprint and about traffic and mobility and infrastructure for mobility, probably Bogota should look like this in actual daily terms, right? But my point is, now when we have this urbanization in the era of the climate change, the more pressure, the more important issues any mayor or city dweller should ask themselves is not, where is my traffic, or where are the roads, or how is the infrastructure? Probably the top three things that we should ask ourselves is where our water came from, where our energy came from, you know, where our food came from. Because those three resources, water, energy, and food, those are the resources that has been challenged by climate change. But the way we have developed so far. And let's always remind ourselves that climate change is not something that was caused by the tigers or the elephants or the bees. Climate change is something that is caused by us, by the way we live, we produce, right? We are the ones causing that pressure. And we are depleting the resources, particularly those three resources: water, energy, and food. That's the thing that we are challenged. So if we really want to commit to climate change, to green development, to sustainable development, those are the top three things in your mind and in your desk. And of course, it has different configurations. For example, in the case of Colombia, thinking about where the water came in and where it goes to, I would say this area, even though Bogota, you may think, if you see the geography of Bogota, right? You said, well, how is these Colombian people decided to have the capital in the middle of three mountains, right? 2,600 meters above the level of the sea, 500 kilometers away from the nearest coast. I mean, couldn't they find an easiest place to be? Why the most challenging? Well, a couple of reasons explain that. Health was an issue. Now, welcome to the tropic. If it is hard for health today, could you imagine in the 14th century? So they kept coming up in the mountains, trying to get out of this very nasty and harsh climate to deal with. You know, all sort of mosquitoes and nature, which is beautiful, but at the same time challenging. So health was an issue, and water was the second issue. They go all this river called the Magdalena River, who started in Cartagena in the Caribbean Sea, and went up to this mountain because Colombia is in a plateau, 2,600 meters in this mountain, and the water is dripping clean and beautifully 4,500 meters above us. Because we are so lucky to have this huge paramount and waterlands called Sumapaz Chingasa. It's the largest paramount waterland in the planet. So even though we have all that high, water will drip from that paramount, drip from this area, and it goes to the Bogota River. So you think in terms where the water comes from, how it runs throughout the city, where it ends up being, how the cycle of water, this is how Bogota will look like. It's quite different if you think about mobility and transportation for employment and for housing, right? And if you think about food, this lunch that you're having, right? As always, where it come from? If we really want to be serious about climate change, then we need to think that the closest our food, the closest and the cleanest, and the more inclusive and just our food is produced regarding to our city, the better. Well, guess what? Cundinamarca produced almost half of the food that we Bogotanos had at the table every day, right? And other states, the next one is Boyacá up in the north, another state. It produced Boyacá, Tolima, and Meta. You could see the location in the map. It produced almost a third. Almost a quarter of our food comes from all over Colombia and all over other places. So this is how the map will look like. Every single out of the 116 municipalities of Cundinamarca grow food for Bogota. So the most important things for urban development in a sustainable manner, if we want to survive, whether your town is 10,000 people or 1 million people or 35 million people, as in Mumbai in India, water, energy, and food should be the first three things you think about, organize about. Whoever produced that for you, that's gotta be your best friend. Because the day you are the mayor or the public officer or the citizen and you don't have water, there is no democracy that can resist that. There is no energy or there is no food. There is no democracy that can resist that. So we were incorporate that. And it transcends, it tends to be regional rather than municipal or just metropolitan based on housing and employment relationships. So going for metropolitan areas is going from institutional settings that are organized about these three topics and amplifying the lens and the organization to work on these other issues. That's more easy to say than to do. Even though if you agree, we are a democracy, we did decentralization in the 1990s, mainly in Colombia. Both governors and mayors are elected. The governor of Bogota used to have deep fights with the governor of Cundinamarca. There is a huge distrust, historical distrust between Cundinamarca and Bogota, because Bogota grew, capturing, co-opting, and incorporating, surrendering to the city neighboring municipalities. So people from Cundinamarca don't like that. They see Bogota as an opportunity, but also as a challenge. This traffic of Bogota, and so on and so forth. So it's not that easy. To begin with, to create the metropolitan region, we had to change the constitution. Welcome to Latin America and to Colombia. You know, all these rigorous juridical procedures, law procedures, so on and so forth. So we have to change the constitution. We have to approve a law that require no simple but qualified majorities. We need to convince our citizens and our city council to allow us to enter in the metropolitan region. The same thing for the governor of Cundinamarca, the same thing for every municipality who want to belong there. But that's crucial. The second thing I will suggest to think about, I was mentioning this last week when I was in Chile or working with the new mayor in Mexico, my dear friend Clara Brugada, or the governor of Santiago de Chile, the capital region of Santiago de Chile, Claudio Orrego. The second thing I will mention is land use planning. This is probably one of the most important techniques and political decisions we need to make. We need to organize the territory to live up, first of all, in sustainable with the environment, but also with the opportunities of employment and education that we need. So in the case of Bogota, we have a huge social debt, particularly with women and youth people. We need to take that into account. We have a huge debt with the planet. We cannot keep consuming and consuming more rural land, more water lands, more ecosystemic land, just to grow and grow and grow and grow and expand and sprawl. You know, the planet has a limit. And so our cities has to have a limit too. We need to have better transportation system. We need to integrate now the metropolitan region vision. We need to go, there are things that will be large and regional, and there are other things that need to be proximate. You want to have your school, your employment, your healthcare, your drugstore, the leisure you want to have. That's the things that you want to have at the proximate level. Very close to you. You don't want to spend 2 hours going to the doctor or going every day to your employment. So we need to combine different scales, the global regional scale, the regional national scale, the local to regional, and the very local and proximate to people. And that's what land use planning is for. So this is, for example, the map of Bogota. How many of you have been in Bogota? Well, quite a few. They are Colombians. A couple of them who are not Colombians. That's good. So this large city that you see when you come in, right? That's only 25% of our territory. We are a very dense 8 million people city, but actually 75% of our territory is environmental, is rural. And we included, we bought it to protect it, precisely to protect it. That's the reason why. So I don't want to get into the details. Do you want to understand why and what is land use plan, how you do it, and what are the most important factors? Welcome to the seminar. I just want to mention this as a provocation. Of course, public transportation. For those of you who have been in Bogota, I recently went in Bangalore. So every time, anytime, you know, in the near future, when somebody told me that Bogota has the worst traffic ever, I would say that's absolutely false. You haven't been in Mumbai or Bangalore. Come on. So yes, building civilization and sustainability and commonality in the 21st century is the history of we using public, clean, multimodal transportation. And with all due respect, if the rest of the world develops in terms of urbanization the way America did it and the United States did it, we're done. The United States is less than 350 million people in the planet, but the way you develop and urbanize, consume 25% of the planet. No way. No feasible. No good example. But that's the cultural reference. What means prosperity? Be like the United States. What means prosperity? Have a car. What means prosperity? Use the car for everything. You don't use it to go to the bathroom because you can't afford it. That's the cultural reference for prosperity. And that's killing us. Really. Redistributing public space. Let me give you just one figure what it means. Building equity. It's not only that income is unequal. Let me give you something that seems easier. Public space for mobility. 80% of Bogotanos don't own a car. They don't have one. Every single day is a no-car day. Okay? But 70% of the public space of mobility for Bogota is devoted to cars. It's devoted to 20% of the people, the most well-to-do people. All the rest of us, the pedestrians, the bikes, the scoops, the public transportation, the buses, the metro, all the rest, the nature, all of us are just like packed in 20% of the space. Redistributing public space, greening public space, changing the material so we can absorb water instead of making it run through the city. We can prevent aisles of heat. That's crucial. And that's land use planning too, and mobility planning too. So that's the other element that I will go deeply. So getting love. I was telling people in India about the Bollywood. You say, well, you're the competition of Hollywood. Hollywood has created all these references that having a car, is the nicest, cool thing ever. Use Bollywood, use whatever, literature, movies, TikTok, everything to create this picture as the coolest people, coolest city ever. That should be our cultural reference, because this is not a problem of architecture. This is not a problem of engineering. It's redistributing. And when you mention distributing or redistributing for anything, it's going to be contentious. Okay, so that's the third element. The fourth element is part of mobility and land use planning and housing and employment. You need to connect those four things. Those are the four basic blocks. Basic blocks. So if you're going to build, which costs millions and billions of taxpayers' money, a public transportation system, you're going to create value. And that value is created by our decision to agglomerate and live collectively, and by our decision to provide infrastructure. Wherever you decide that a new metro line is going to be there rather than there, is going to have 10 rather than 5 stations, you are increasing and changing the land value. And it's not related to anything that a particular owner of that land did. Is the agglomeration, is the building of the infrastructure, is the use, the aggregated demand that such infrastructure creates. It creates value. So doing that land value capturing, don't allowing the lucky person, the lucky owner, the lucky developer who happens to be there but did nothing really to create a value. Part of it has to be part of something you can internalize, because that's how economy works. That's okay. But just part of it, not all of it. So doing a strategic development surrounding the areas of development or the areas of new public transportation, that's crucial. Sometimes this is urban renewal, but not renewal in the sense that the famous Robert Moses did in New York. He's tearing people apart and tearing the city apart and gentrifying areas and excluding people based on different, very awful criteria, including racism. No, it's making sure that people who is there could continue living there, but in a better conditions and in a new development that can provide more housing and employment opportunities. So that's a fourth topic. And I just have 5 minutes. So I said the basic units, right? Were land use planning, the multimodal transportation system, taking care of nature first, redistributing public space, taking advantage of the land value we create together to fund part of this new infrastructure and services we're going to provide. But there is a fifth thing, which is care. That is the most crucial, proximate social element for a good, well city. So let me tell you what I mean by care. This is a gender perspective. If you want to change the world, you want to change the cities, you want to have sustainability, you want to have a near future, plan like a girl and live like a woman, really. So I'm coming from a city of 8 million people. 52% of them are women. 1.2 million, almost a quarter of those women, are unpaid caregivers. Now, surprisingly, half of them are in poverty. 52% of Colombia's employment is informal. 32% of Bogota's employment is informal, meaning that people don't have a minimum salary, a pension system, a health system that is publicly or privately provided. But we're all going to be kids and need care. At some point in our lives, we may get sick and need care. We're all going to get elder and need care. We may have some disability and may need even more and more specialized care. Who provides that care? Around the planet, women provide that care. Care is the most important industry of sustainable development. It's the industry that allows all the other industries, tech, Apple, Google, Ford, cannot exist without care. It's just that care is this industry and service which is provided unpaid. Unpaid for most part, particularly in the global south. So using the infrastructure and designing the city, thinking as a caregiver and as a care receiver throughout the world. I've looked the figures in Chile, in Colombia, in Mexico, in India, in Pakistan, in China, around the planet. Women use more public transportation, do more trips, shorter trips, because we do more care trips. No? We go to the school to get the kids to school, then we go to the groceries, then we go to work. Then in the middle of the day, we take the advantage to go to the drugstore to do something. And then once a month, we reserve some time to bring our parent or granddaughter or grandfather, to the doctor. Those are care trips. So putting closer the infrastructure that provides those services, connecting them properly with pedestrian space, with nature, with circular roads, for example, to reduce the amount of time, of money, of waste, of life that caregivers are providing is part of doing the care economy at the urban level. It's not only building, of course, national governments have to build social security systems to provide this care, of course. But at the urban level, this is the fifth most important element in my experience, both at the academic level and as a practitioner of building cities for sustainable development. This is an example of a care block that we created in Bogota. I will tell you that a little bit more of that in the seminar. But we were able to support close to 500,000 women caregivers in poverty and members of their family just by thinking and organizing infrastructure we already have. We didn't build nothing new. We just changed services to recognize, reduce, and redistribute unpaid care work from over the shoulders of women to the shoulders of other members of their society, men of this world. You're welcome to learn to care. We learn. Everybody can learn too. So that's sort of the 5 things that we will go through the seminar. I hope you might be interested and motivated by this topic, either in this seminar or in other classes. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, for your presentation. So now we will start the Q&A session. We will take 3 questions at a time. Please try to be direct with your questions, and there will be no follow-up questions to give opportunity to other people. So does anyone have a question? Okay, perfect. I'll give you the mic.
Thanks, Claudia. 2 quick questions. One, Bogota is a place which for almost 50 years, more than 50 years, had been in this state of constant worry, citizens, about whether they'll see the future, because of the La Violencia period. And during your time as mayor, how do you get people to buy into sustainability and start thinking about the future when for so long they were kind of living day to day? And the other, how did you build trust in a place like Bogota, where there are several pockets or barrios that kind of were outside of governance or outside of state? So how did you work on those two things?
Hi, Claudia. Thank you so much. I think you are one of the few policymakers that has spoken so extensively on care and prioritizing care. And in some communities, there's still a stigma that sort of exists that it's the responsibility of a woman anyway, and it's not something that needs special care, special attention. Did you face any stigma when you chose to prioritize this as a policy area? How did you overcome that, and what advice do you have?
Thank you so much. And just to add to that question, anticipating that the world population is getting older and the mental cognitive decline crisis is going only to increase. We are going to face a caregivers burnout crisis or caregivers decline in numbers very, very soon or sooner than anticipated. Like, how does this project is taking into consideration that it only is going to get bigger, this problem?
I would say in a general response, I think democratization and decentralization allow Bogota to improve enormously. And I would say that's in general happened in Latin America, right? The more centralized, caudillo, populist-driven in the 20th century we have heavily high presidential systems. The less well-being in the cities we have large pockets of people coming into the city either for economic opportunities or because of violence. But let me just give you these figures. And what I think is a combination of these things, and I have to say, we have been elected mayors since 1988 in Colombia. Relatively recent. And sort of strengthening after that wave of democratization, we managed collectively as society to strengthen the fiscal base of the city, to have autonomy of resources that we can manage on our own. And a society diverse enough and empowered enough to hold accountable whoever they elect, as the combination of democratization. And I will say that in general, for municipalities over 100,000 inhabitants, worked relatively well in the case of Colombia. So let me tell you this, these large pockets of informal settlements, very poor, very excluded, heavily segregated, accounts for 30% of the city's territory 35 years ago. Okay? 35 years ago. These were neighborhoods that didn't have clean water, didn't have sewage, didn't have proper social infrastructure, were not connected to public transportation, were not legalized, so they were not allowed to receive public investment. I mean, the whole nightmare. They were 35% of the city. Now they are 2% of the city. So the pressure of democratization, make people give voice, have organized, elect, hold them accountable. It takes time, of course, but it relatively works, I would say. Second of all, Colombia and the 7 main cities, among them Bogota, has been a place of innovation, social innovation in public service. Here we have, for example, a friend who works in one of the recent innovations of Bogota, which is the agency Atenea for post-secondary education, science, and technology. So we have a very good technocratic public services, the best in the country. It has been a political decision, not corruption, not clientelism, but a good technocratic, merit-based public service. It was a decision. It didn't work like that when the president appointed the mayor based on bipartisan agreements. So it took time, but it paid the price, I would say. Now, as for trust, well, that's how you build trust. And I will say, in general, with one exception, Bogota has had very good mayors. Mayors from the left, mayors from the right, mayors in the center, but really not before me. I'm not speaking about me. But so it's a tradition. We each form each other. The citizens, the organizations, the entrepreneurs, the government bureaucracy learn throughout time, to accomplish things, to innovate. Land use planning and master urban plans, this is something that is done in Brazil and Colombia mainly. Something like the Plan de Ordenamiento Territorial. I mentioned that in Africa. Nobody knows what's that. I mentioned that in Bangalore. Nobody knows what that. They're very proud now. For example, they have the climate change plan. I say, nice. First, fantastic, good step. And then you have to territorialize that. So that sort of innovation also works and build trust throughout the years. Now, as for, I won't say it's the stigmatization. I mean, this is cultural thing. Machism and patriarchalism is a cultural thing. It's a creation. It's a cultural creation. So the hardest part of the care economy, of the care blocks, of the care services that we decided to implement is that, yes, we created that because I'm the first woman to be elected. We have fantastic mayors before. All of them men, none of them thought about that. And believe me, they are democratic, socially progressive mayors, but none of them thought that was not normal that 1 million women in Bogota are devoted to care are in poverty for doing unpaid care work. It looks the way it always has been. Until a woman was there and said, guess what? It's not normal. It's not normal. This should be a choice, not an obligation. But at the same time, so there are many women of all ages. This started when I was senator, even before I was senator, before my term. The Senate approved that the care economy in Colombia has to be measured in the national macroeconomic accounts. That was a huge achievement of the Women Caucus in Congress back in 2010, probably. And because of that, we know now for sure every year that the care economy accounts for 13% of Bogota's GDP. For 20% of Colombia's GDP. When I'm saying that this is the most important industry, I'm not joking. I mean, this is macroeconomic data, okay? But the problem at the same time is that because of that and social movements and the Women's Cities Council, we bring the care economy, we take this seriously, we decided to create the care blocks, but ultimately, there are not that many women saying, where is my care block? I want to be relieved of these services. Something you're creating a demand for. Because actually many of the caregivers believe that being overburdened, in poverty, excluded, sacrificed is to be a good woman. It's what it means and what it takes to be a good mother. So starting this conversation is a challenge, but it's part of the process. And let me tell you this, probably 200 years ago, nobody thought that coming to school was normal. Probably not many people was asking for it, registering for it. So yes, every public service that we have now that we take for granted and think is normal, it was not at some point in history. But that's what we need to do. And I will say that in general has been very well received. And how to incorporate it. So this went from being non-existent in Bogota to be included in my government plan, to be included in my 4-year development plan. Then we included in the land use planning, the same way we plan for mobility, right, or for employment. Care is a land use planning criteria that now is mandated by the city law. We were able, the city council approves that. So now we know, for example, that I created 21 care blocks so that any woman in Bogota in the near future, in the next 15 years, can have a care block that helps them with unpaid care work to relieve her for that. Bogota has to build 45 care blocks. And that's now the same way we know that we're going to build 5 metro lines. The same way we know that we're going to build 60 more schools in order for kids to have a proper education. We know that we need to have not 21, but 45 care blocks in the near future. That's part of the sort of the institutionalization of the process.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question because we're running out of time.
Claudia, thanks for being here. So in the last decades, Bogota has lost factories and factories have moved from the city to the outskirts, right? Mosquera, for example, Tocancipá, and we have underutilized land within the boundaries of the city. So my question is, what is the role of urban renovation in the city for Bogota? And do you think it's a way to decrease urban sprawl?
That's something we will look at closely in the seminar. But just to give you a sense, that was an effect of the land use plan that Bogota approved in 2004. So in 2004, we said, you know what? We don't want industries in Bogota. Every activity needs a piece of land. Any activity. Yeah? La casa en el aire, just in Vallenato, right? House without land is a famous Vallenato song hanging in the air. You know, that's in the song. But any activity needs a piece of land. You want industries or techs or housing or parks to be, you need to provide land for it. If we say we don't provide that land for it, we don't reserve it, we don't organize it, they will go. It's not even that they have higher taxes. They simply don't have a place to stay. So they start moving. And at the same time, it became this, I would say, insane competition with neighboring municipalities who will offer less taxes to attract them. We all lost. And now this is something that we work with the governor, Cundinamarca, and with my fellow mayors, and said, there is no reason for have this competition. We will be better off if we plan together. At the end, we are the same people. Nobody cares where ends Bogota and where Mosquera starts. People need the same: water, energy, food, employment, housing, security, opportunities to make a living, and a good education. Everybody needs that. So it's much better if we have a common determined environmental land use plan for the region, and then everyone implement this broad master regional plan that we agree on. So that's sort of the move that we're having now.
Okay, maybe one more question because we began a little late. I knew that you had a question. Maybe you can, yeah.
Thank you so much. So as cities and metropolitan regions are spearheading these approaches to sustainable development, you know, it's clear that they're increasingly connecting with global objectives, and so such as the voluntary local review process. And so I wanted to ask you, kind of in your experience, what changes have you seen to global governance institutions to include subnational voices? And then also, what further reforms do you think are necessary?
Not as much, I will say. But well, I mean, to be fair, I will say that the last 4 years, particularly after the pandemic, really, I suddenly am invited to different, scenarios, and the UN Habitat, the multilateral banks, because they realize they need to work with us, and because climate change action is actually happening much faster and effectively in cities than in rural areas. Because 50% of the population of the world lives in cities, and 70% of the population of the world will live in cities in the next 50 years. So they're starting to think, but the entire multilateral system, global multilateral system, is designed for nation states. So, they might invite you to a side event, I might invite you to sit at but not really to sit at the table, even less to speak, even less to decide. So really something we need to figure it out. This is a different topic, is how to include different institutions, not only the nation states, but also city regions at the global stage. And I was in the most urgent thing, I was talking to the Secretary General of the United Nations, who were very kind and generous to invite us, different mayors, selection mayors, different cities and regions, to speak before the assembly. And I said, look, we'll be more than honored if you create a place for us here in the National Assembly, of course, in the General Assembly of the United Nations. But if you offer me that, or change the multilateral bank's rules to direct money and credit for the cities without the sovereign guarantee of a nation state, I will take that. Thank you for your seat at the General Assembly. It might be fantastic, but if I can get the money, the money must be much useful. And I could use it to improve it, to build the system, for example, the multimodal transportation system. We know that's the correct thing to do. It costs a hell of money. I need access to multilateral money to do that, to a better conditions, to a lower and cheapest conditions, to say that. And I always said, this probably Colombians understands more than other people this, but I'll always say, look, you're lending to Colombia, which is my country, I love it, but my country is indebted to the equivalent of 67% of its GDP. So because of that, you charge them more money, but you're afraid they might not be able to pay. Okay. If Bogota, which is twice Costa Rica, or twice Uruguay, would have been a country, I indebted 3%, 3% of my GDP. And because you oblige me to go through the lending process with a national sovereignty, you lend me in the same terms and conditions as if I were Colombia. I'm not. I'm much better. I'm much better. My economic record is much better. My fiscal record is much better. My macroeconomic figures, if you want to, make the equivalencies, is much better. If I would have gone to a private bank, they could have treated me differently. And that was going to happen to all the cities. So I understand the risk. Mayors might get crazy, and if that the city is, I understand the risk too. So I'm not asking for a free lunch or free money. I'm asking for criteria and conditions and processes and rules to follow, serious rules. But free the money. Let me finish with this figure. If you go to the COP, I've been twice, and I've been sort of, what the hell? Nothing's going to happen. Talk and talk and talk and talk, and nobody do anything. Now I'm trying to build the second metro line of Bogota, which will diminish carbon emissions faster than any other project in the city, and I cannot get the money. So we need to invest $5 trillion a year in the next 20 years not to be cooked in this planet. We're not doing it. Those who have the money are not putting the money in the investments and the projects that are ready in the cities that are ready to follow whatever rules the world decides. So really, it's not because of mayors, it's not because of cities, it's because we may not survive if these discussions take too long.
Thank you, Claudia. So we can close this session now. I just wanted to say that right now we are having a career chat with Claudia here at the CID Perkins conference room. So you can grab food and you can come with us and you can ask questions about career to Claudia. So, well, thank you, Claudia, again for being here. Also, here's a gift from the CID team. Almost forgot that part. See you in a couple of minutes.